It's the 25th of October, 1873. Off the eastern shore of Newfoundland in Conception Bay, a fisherman named Theophilus Picot is having the fight of a lifetime. He approached what appeared to him to be a pile of debris floating on the surface, and he hit it with the oar of his boat. This was no debris though. Theophilus had struck a sea monster, one of the great creatures of the deep, and it did not appreciate his aggression. The creature sinks its giant beak into the bottom of the boat before throwing its monstrous tentacles over the boat, possibly to pull it to the deep, straight to Davy Jones' locker. Theophilus thinks fast and grabs the axe that he brings on fishing trips for some reason, hacking, ripping, and tearing at the monster, managing to sever 2 tentacles from its body. After losing its tentacles, the monster retreats in a squid-like fashion, leaving a trail of ink, much like a squid would, and was observed to have a pale pinkish color, similar to that of a squid. Obviously, the scientific community of 1873 would call bullshit on this story, as they had with so many similar giant squid and general sea monster sightings in the past from some of the most acclaimed sailors on the planet. At least they would have, had Picot not thought to save at least 1 tentacle, maybe 2, and sent one to Alexander Murray of the Canadian Geological Survey. 1 tentacle was at some point discarded or otherwise lost to time, but the other, measuring 19 feet long, was preserved and kept. Murray sent a letter detailing the story I've just told you, along with a picture of the severed tentacle, to Harvard professor Luis Agassiz. He was a professor of geology and biology, and also an avid white supremacist and eugenics supporter. Louis then forwarded this letter to the Peabody Academy of Science in Salem, Massachusetts, shortly before his death, and it was published in the American Naturalist, an illustrated magazine of natural history, volume 8. I've known the Picot story for years, and Alexander Murray's letter in American Naturalist was listed in the sources for many of the books that I read for this video. But I wouldn't have found it so easily at biodiversitylibrary.org or even known that site existed in the first place if Jacob Geller hadn't linked directly to it in the description of his video, Fear of Big Things Underwater. The link to that video and the book are in the description, along with all the sources I use for this video, be it print or a book that I found in a free online library that I'm linking directly to. I do want to mention that I probably wouldn't have even had the video idea for the Kraken video that you're watching now if it weren't for Wendy and his cryptid iceberg videos. He's got like 4 of them now. He goes through an iceberg of cryptids and he also ranks them. And he put the Kraken in the wrong spot. Won't tell you where that was, but would definitely recommend you watch that. It's the first episode. It's down in the description, and if you like that one, watch the rest of them. They're all fantastic. Now, through the years, it seems like fact and fiction of this story have gotten melded together. There are many tellings of a 12-year-old Tom Picot with Theophilus, who also helped wrangle this monstrous beast. But those are questioned pretty hard. There's no mention of Tom Picot in the original text. Also, Theophilus was like not a famous person. I couldn't even find a picture of him. The only thing with his name is telling about this story. He was a fisherman. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a star. He was a guy. He was a normal guy, you know. Also, while we're on the subject of the Picot story, the squid attack in general is largely questioned and said to be like this thing that Alexander Murray came up with so that the story would get more attention. We'll talk about that later in the Rampant Speculation section of this video. I'm Smoo. I make videos here on YouTube, and today I'm going to be telling you why the Kraken is probably real. At the end of this video, I'm also going to have like just a quick little update about the channel and content to come. If you're interested in that, feel free to watch that. If not, click off when I start. It'll be fine. Now, Picot's tentacle made waves in the scientific community, the members of which generally believed that fishermen and sailors reporting giant squid, kraken, sea monsters, sea serpents, that they were generally lying, incompetent, or both. And they didn't keep this to themselves either. The general consensus was that life in the deep sea was not possible and that there's no way these fishermen could be correct. In Wendy Williams' book, Kraken, The Curious, Exciting, and Slightly Disturbing Science of Squid, she mentioned that the general consensus in the scientific community was that life in the deep sea would throw off the natural balance and therefore was impossible. I didn't confirm the primary source on that. That is my paraphrasing of what she said in her book, but it sounds about right. Now this is 19 feet from this end of this yarn braid that I made all the way to here. That's 19 feet. That is a long tentacle. You roll it up. This is a hell of a lot of tentacle. You could feed many families with that much calamari. Now, this 19-foot piece of tentacle was chopped with an axe. Picot estimated that the full tentacle was 30 feet long. This is about 30 feet of braided yarn. Now, the reason I'm using braided yarn for this is because it's a pretty good visual. This took me over 8 hours to do, at least. I didn't finish it, so this is a little longer than 30 feet. Right here, where it ends, is 26 feet. So to here is about 30 feet of braided yarn. This is a lot of tentacle. I'll finish it at some point. My kids got it all tangled up and I didn't want to delay recording this video anymore to have the fucking tentacle finished. Theophilus estimated that the full tentacle length was 30 feet, with the full length of the squid from tentacle to tip of the mantle being about 60 feet long and 5 feet wide in diameter, which is crazy. But the largest giant squid that we've recorded to this day is 59 feet long. And by the way, some marine biologists estimate that they can be up to 66 feet long. For reasons I'm sure you can understand, the 19-foot tentacle, along with Picot's personal estimation that the full tentacle was around 30 feet long, that the squid itself was double that length at 60 feet long, 5 feet wide in diameter, that made waves in the scientific community. The Kraken is by no means a new legend. The oldest recorded mention of it is from 1180. At least that's according to The Kraken When Myth Encounters Science, a 2014 paper from Rodrigo Salvador and Barbara Tomotani, which is citing Henry Lee's 1883 book Sea Monsters Unmasked, which further cites Bishop Enric Pontoppidan's Natural History of Norway from 1788. Notably, Natural History of Norway is not a book of sea monsters and creatures and myths of the deep. It is a book that endeavors to be a straightforward accounting of the natural history of Norway. According to the Natural History of Norway, fishermen can tell when the Kraken is near due to the ridiculous amount of fish that they catch as soon as their lines are out. Pontoppidan said, and I quote, "Our fishermen unanimously affirm, and without the least variation in their accounts, that when they row out several miles to sea, expect to find 80 or 100 fathoms water. It often happens that they do not find above 20 or 30, and sometimes less. There are sometimes 20 boats or more got together, and throwing out their lines at a moderate distance from each other, and the only thing they have to observe is whether the depth continues the same or whether it grows shallower by their seeming to have less water. If this last be the case, then they find that the Kraken is raising himself near the surface, and then it is not time for them to stay any longer. They immediately leave off fishing, take to their oars, and get away as fast as they can. When they have reached the usual depth of the place and find themselves out of danger, they lie upon their oars, and in a few minutes after they see the enormous monster come up to the surface of the water, where he shows himself sufficiently, though his whole body does not appear, which in all likelihood no human eye ever beheld, excepting the young of this species, which shall afterwards be spoken of. Its back upper part, which seems to be in appearance about an English mile and a half in circumference. Now, I've conveniently stopped quoting here, as the rest of the quote goes on to talk about the Kraken's sandy shores and its islands and its horns, all of which are counterproductive to the main idea of this video, to the argument that I'm pursuing right now, which is fine. I'm allowed to do that. I'm framing a narrative. What do you want? In Sea Monsters Unmasked, Lee pays special attention to the section of Natural History of Norway in which Pontoppidan insists that he is not the best person to decide the validity of the stories and the legends of which he writes. Lee states that Pontoppidan's theory regarding the Kraken, quote, is stated with a modesty with which his detractors would do well to imitate, but willingly submit my suppositions in this and every other dubious matter to the judgment of those who are better experienced. I think we can all learn a thing or two from Pontoppidan and then from Lee 100 years later. The beginning of Sea Monsters Unmasked is notably dedicated to dismantling an apparent strawman argument that Kraken detractors were using to paint Pontoppidan as unintelligent for one reason or another. Once Lee sufficiently explains the context around Pontoppidan's claims and puts the detractors in their place, he uses the rest of the Kraken section to speculate, using legends and knowledge of the time, whether the Kraken would be a squid, an octopus, or a cuttlefish. This work is largely outdated, but I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in the subject. It serves as an interesting look into the discourse in the matter shortly after the Picot story broke in 1873. Now, the scientific climate of the time in 1873 when Picot found this tentacle and the story broke, it was turmoil between the public and the fishermen and sailors and the scientific community. We had chaos in the streets. It was wild. In Wendy Williams' book, Kraken, The Curious, Exciting, and Slightly Disturbing Science of Squid, Wendy Williams painted a vivid picture of the rift between scientists and sailors in the time of Picot. It was believed widely that the sea pressure would be too much for life to even survive down there, that life would throw off the delicate balance of nature that we were talking about earlier. Seafarers reported sightings of giant squids specifically, as well as sightings of sea serpents and other various monsters, and science rejected them. Now, I want to tell you a quote directly from Wendy Williams' book. Quote, "Nevertheless, despite the specific knowledge provided by sailors and seafarers, science stuck to its dogma. Nothing could survive the water pressure deep below. No such thing as a giant squid could possibly exist." In 1848, the matter came to a head. Peter McQuay, I guess, captain of the British HMS Daedalus, reported seeing a 60-foot sea monster, nothing like a whale, floating on the water near the Cape of Good Hope. McQuay wrote that he and his officers saw the thing at such a close range that, had it been a man, they would have seen his facial characteristics quite clearly. The animal moved at a speed of about 10 knots, the captain wrote. Williams continues from there to point out the conflict, but I have a few comments on this quote. This quote is clearly painting this as a run-in between the British HMS Daedalus and a giant squid. It unambiguously uses this story after the phrase, "No such thing as a giant squid could possibly exist." Just keep that in your mind, put it in your back pocket. We're going to utilize it very soon. Now, Richard Owen, the scientific legend and paleontologist that coined the word dinosaur, had a very public back and forth with Captain McQuay in the British newspaper The Times. McQuay would talk about his sea monster that he saw, and Richard Owens would be like, "That's impossible. You're a quack. I can't believe that you would ever say something like that." And then that would be in the Times. And then McQuay would write to the Times again saying things like, no, we definitely saw it. It was definitely there. What the hell's wrong with you? And Richard Owen would be like, no, I'm amazed that you are even a pilot. I'm amazed that you're allowed to sail boats. These are, obviously I'm paraphrasing. These articles are behind a paywall, unfortunately. I couldn't find the originals, but every story I read about them pretty much boils down like that. Now, Wendy Williams, the author of the book that I saw this interaction in originally, is framing this as a disagreement about the giant squid, saying, quote, Owen was unwilling to believe in the existence of a humongous animal so closely related to the tiny nautilus, which Richard Owen also was the guy who coined the term nautilus. Like the guy was a legend. Richard Owen published work on the nautilus. He didn't coin the term nautilus. I spoke out of turn 2 seconds ago. So yeah, the nautilus research that he did was kind of the turning point of his career, how he started to make a name for himself before discovering dinosaurs. A bit of an asshole, but a legend. Here's the thing about this story. Every account that I can find about this sighting clearly shows that it is a sighting from the HMS Daedalus and Captain McQuay, and they saw a 60-foot sea serpent, not a squid, not a squid at all. Sea serpents are actually a thing in mythology. They're around. They're in the game Valheim, most recent example I could think of. And so the main idea is intact. I find the framing of this whole situation disingenuous. Wendy Williams goes out of her way to say, this is the giant squid. He couldn't believe that a giant squid would be related to the tiny nautilus. He didn't believe in the prospect of squids being that big at all. But the whole conversation is about a sea serpent. So, I mean, that is one of the first things in the book. And it's a great book. I read the whole thing. It's a great book. It is filled with little anecdotes about squids throughout life, about how we've used research into squids to further medical technology, to gain a better understanding of humans and of natural ecosystems and of how color works in the deep sea. I mean, it is a great book. Unfortunately, this very first thing in the book being framed so disingenuously, it kind of recolors the whole thing in my mind. I don't know if I could even rely on this book, so I don't for the rest of this video. I do recommend reading it. I do recommend also checking the sources that she's quoting. Now, public perception was more generally open to the idea of giant squids and of krakens and the like, more than science was. Most people were like, yeah, I could see that. But the idea of the lack of deep sea life was the zeitgeist of the time in the scientific community, and there's nothing anyone could do to sway that. Now, Picot's 19-foot-long tentacle was enough to prove that the Architeuthis dux, the giant squid, truly exists. Now, again, Wendy Williams' book makes it sound like the name Architeuthis dux came after 73, after the tentacle, and after the story gained traction. But it was actually coined in 1857, Gepetus Steenstrup, after he examined materials that washed up in the Bahamas. So almost 20 years earlier, Wendy says, quote, then came Theophilus Picot's severed tentacle, measured at 19 feet and tangible beyond dispute. The putrefying prize ended the argument. Picot's animal came to be acknowledged as a squid, Architeuthis, the Earth's largest then known invertebrate. The word comes from the Greek archi, meaning chief, and teuthis, meaning squid. Now, it doesn't explicitly say it was named after Theophilus' tentacle. I concede. It does not say that. What it does say is this all happened, then came the tentacle, and it was acknowledged to be Architeuthis dux, or Architeuthis. It doesn't say dux. Anyway, there is another book, one that I find vastly more credible, than Wendy Williams' book. The Search for the Giant Squid, published at a time when there were no live photos of a giant squid. And the author of the book, Richard Ellis, said that it was the most elusive image in natural history. There's one problem, though. Now, this book here, The Search for the Giant Squid, was written in 1998 by Richard Ellis. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the discoveries concerning the giant squid happened in the last 10 or 20 years or so. So that renders this book effectively outdated, as stated by Richard himself.
What you doing? I ain't in the way now, am I? Okay.
All jokes aside, Search for the Giant Squid is probably the best book I've read on the subject. It is the book that I've used as my main source throughout this video. I mean, most of what I've talked about so far happened before 1998. Without further ado, let's go down a list of milestones, a timeline for things that happened during the search for the giant squid, just to give a better idea of what exactly we're looking at. 1848, the HMS Daedalus spotted the sea serpent that we talked about earlier. Now, at the same time, HMS Plumper also spotted a sea monster. The Richard Ellis book outlines this much better than the Wendy Williams book. It quotes much of the back and forth between Captain McKay and Richard Owens. It puts it in quotes instead of vaguely describing it, because it's not trying to frame it as some kind of debate over the existence of a giant squid. Also, in the book, Richard Ellis draws the conclusion in a logical way as to why you would think that actually they saw a giant squid, not a sea serpent, because of the way that it's underwater. I'll put an illustration right here. The observers have no expert knowledge of zoology. Their observation is therefore without merit. Then Ellis says that he went on to talk about McKay's sighting specifically, saying, "It is very probable that no one on board the Daedalus ever before held a gigantic seal swimming freely in the open ocean. A larger body of evidence from eyewitnesses might be got together in proof of ghosts than the sea serpent," which is a fucking sick burn, honestly. Finally, I deny the existence of excitement or the possibility of optical illusion. I adhere to the statement as to form, color, and dimensions contained in my official report to the Admiralty, and I leave them as data whereupon the learned and scientific may exercise the pleasures of imagination until some more fortunate opportunity shall occur of making a closer acquaintance with the great unknown. In the present instance, assuredly no ghost. Basically saying, bro, the fuck you on about? So that was pretty cool. I didn't burn it. 1857, Johannes Japetus Smith Steenstrup, probably said that wrong, names Architeuthis ducks. Now, I know I said Architeuthis throughout the rest of this video, and the other take with the other shirt, it's Architeuthis. That's what happens when you read stuff the first time and there's no phonetic spelling, and then you read another book and they say this is the phonetic spelling, but you already learned the other one. So the correct pronunciation is Architeuthis. Now, Steenstrup named this beast from finding bits and pieces of them along the shores of the Bahamas, and he was like, this is clearly a gigantic squid. I'm gonna name it Architeuthis ducks. That's the long and short of it. Now, as a little side note here, it's not really one of the great milestones that I have listed out, but in 1861, there was a French warship that caught a giant squid and pulled it up, but it only got half of the squid. 1873, they pressed the like button on this video because they liked it. In 1873 was the great Picot versus Squid Duel that we talked about in the beginning of the video. It was amazing. If you missed that part somehow, it's right at the beginning. You can't miss it. Now, the next year, 1874, the first photo of a giant squid was produced I suppose. Now, Reverend Moses Harvey was given a corpse of a giant squid that was caught in Logie Bay, Newfoundland, and he draped it over his sponge bath and took a photo. I cannot imagine the smell. I have chickens in the other room. That smells bad already. I cannot imagine having a fucking giant squid in your living room over your sponge bath. The sheer stench. That is dedication. Sir, Reverend Moses Harvey, what a crazy dude. Now, I'm not going to say nothing else important happened. There was more sightings. There was more crazy stuff going on, but nothing really milestone adjacent in my mind up until 1925. We're going to jump ahead almost, just over 50 years. First colossal squid found. Now, the colossal squid is different from a giant squid. It is a distinctly different species. The colossal squid is bigger, I believe, and it is found in the Arctic waters. The giant squid is rarely found in the Arctic waters. So the first colossal squid was found in the belly of a sperm whale. Now, you might remember earlier I said that the fishermen knew because of sperm whales. They knew because of the battle scars on sperm whales. They knew because of the beaks in the bellies of sperm whales. A huge part of sperm whale diets is these massive squids, giant and colossal. Apparently, according to this children's book that I read, eating giant squids is like bubblegum or candy for a sperm whale. There's no bones to worry about. If you can manage to get the thing in your mouth, you can just chew it. And then, the beak is something to worry about, but the sperm whales are so big, it's kind of a non-issue. They form the ambergris to protect their organs against that sharp beak. It's really pretty interesting. Now, 1995, 1996, numerous giant squids were found in Australia, New Zealand, outside Tasmania. They found a female one off near some mountain I can't remember the name of in Australia. There was a ton of giant squids now showing up around New Zealand, similar to how there was so many giant squids showing up around Newfoundland like 100 years before. In 1997, a genius plot was hatched. National Geographic was teaming up with some marine biologists and experts on squids to strap a critter cam to a sperm whale and allow the sperm whale to take them to the giant squid's natural habitat, or just see one on video in general in the process of eating one. They didn't get to actually use the critter cam. We don't have any GoPro footage of a giant squid showing up on a sperm whale's GoPro. That's not what happened. But they did have some other cameras, one of them being on the MIT's AUV Odyssey. AUV stands for Autonomous Underwater Vehicle Odyssey. They saw several sperm whales, but they didn't see a giant squid, and they weren't able to use the critter cam. By the time the New Zealand Department of Conservation gave them the okay to strap a critter cam onto one of them bad boys, the weather got too bad. It was unsafe to use it, and they had to skedaddle. Now, 2003, this one is also not a milestone. I just thought it was funny. Dr. Steve O'Shea grinds up naughty bits. That is what that says. Basically, Steve O'Shea made a giant squid gonad paste by grinding up the sex organs of male giant squids, and he dispersed them in the water. He was hoping to create a sex frenzy from these giant squids and hopefully catch them on camera and catch them doing the deed, I guess. And that didn't work. Great idea, though. Points for effort. 2004, this was huge, actually. First photo of a live giant squid was taken. Now, before that, remember, all the giant squid photos were dead. We got a tentacle. We got a dead one over a sponge bath. There was a bunch of dead ones in museums, in labs. I didn't include any of those on here. This is the first living giant squid photo. Now, the squid attacked bait that was on a hook. And there was a camera on, I think it was a 30-second timer, just taking photos of it. And this squid wriggled and writhed and slammed about in a frenzy, finally got off the hook and scurried away. Now in 2006, the first video of a live giant squid was caught by Tsunemi Kubota. So what's cool about this, similar tactic. Giant squid attacked bait that was below a boat on a line. Now this giant squid was caught on camera off the coast of the Ogasawara Islands of Japan. Tsunemi Kubota worked for the National Museum of Japan. 2012, the first giant squid was caught on camera in its natural habitat off of Japan's Ogasawara archipelago. That is a mouthful. Now, marine biologist Dr. Edith Widler. I keep calling her Edith Widler here. Her name is not Widler. Her name is Widder. Edith Widder. My bad. I don't know where the L came from. Created a new type of camera and a bait for this. They had a bioluminescent bait that was designed to copy the patterns of jellyfish. And when the jellyfish get all up in a frenzy, it would signal to these giant squid that food was nearby. And these guys get all hungry and grumbly and they mosey on over to where the jellyfish are signaling and they go, okay, here's some food, and they eat it. Probably cut that whole thing. And the camera system developed by Dr. Widler is called the Medusa. Now, this thing is attached to the bioluminescent bait. Here's a photo of it. It's pretty cool looking. It utilizes a red light, which most marine creatures can't see anyway. Like the pinkish red color of the giant squid is kind of camouflaged because of that reason as well. So these bioluminescent lures were placed outside of their submersible and attached to the Medusa camera rig, and they caught the video of it. All this to say, we didn't even have footage of a giant squid in its habitat until 2012. Now, up until now, we've got footage of giant squids in and around North America. We've got all kinds of advancements since 2012. These are the ones I was most interested in, just for my own arbitrary reasons. A zoologist called Clyde Roper said, "When you meet a giant squid in the deep sea, the only ones you catch are the slow, the sick, and the stupid, because they normally have excellent eyesight and are extremely sensitive to what goes on around them. They have the most highly developed brain of any invertebrate." A couple of years ago, YouTube was desperate for me to watch a video on deep sea gigantism. I resisted for probably a month or two before inevitably clicking on it. Since then, I've watched the video 5 or 6 times. It's great. It's fantastic. Link below. According to this video, deep sea gigantism, the phenomena where sea life gets bigger and bigger and bigger in the deep parts of the sea where the pressure is the greatest and the food the most scarce, happens more often in deeper, darker places and in colder waters. In other words, higher pressure correlates with bigger animals, and colder waters correlates with bigger animals. Now, I mention this because in the table included with search for the giant squid, you see many specimens from the Bahamas, from New Zealand, from Australia, also in Norway, also north of the Bahamas. Obviously, Norway is quite cold. The Bahamas are not known to be particularly cold. There's a sighting of a 500-pound one in Monterey Bay, California. In 1912, was it actually 500 pounds? Who knows? There's another sighting of a 30-foot one in Monterey Bay, California. All this to say, if we're seeing these animals in Monterey Bay, California, and we're seeing them in the Bahamas, who's to say that they're not even bigger deep in the ocean where we can't see them, in the Arctic? Who's to say that there's not a colossal, eldritch-sized kraken waiting under the ocean? Do I personally believe that? No. I do think there's much bigger squid out there, though. This starts the rampant speculation section of the video, by the way. Many people have stated that the Picot story probably isn't accurate, probably exaggerated, because giant squids don't typically attack boats, and fishermen for that matter. But I think that they leave out the fact that he hit the squid with his oar. Like if a squid is retaliating against a guy who's just whacking the shit out of it with an oar, I don't think that's necessarily aggression. Not to mention this squid was floating on the surface, presumably looking for food. When you're looking for food, you're rifling through your pantry, you're out in the wild, and you get smacked with something, you're gonna fight back. So yeah, take that, experts. Hot take alert, there is a hot take incoming. Consider this your federally mandated hot take alert. If you're prone to being upset by unpopular opinions, you may want to strap in for this one. So the ocean is quite deep. We haven't been to the bottom of it. We've only explored 5% of the ocean's area, according to the NOAA Ocean Exploration and Research Association, I suppose. There is life in the deep sea. We've only ever been wrong about the ocean. Sea serpents are real. They're oarfish. They're not serpents after all, but they're real all the same. The giant squid is real empirically. It exists. We've been more wrong about the ocean than we've been right. There's many creatures in the deep sea that we didn't know existed. There are creatures in the ocean that we thought were myths that live in the water. We find creatures that we didn't know existed that have been around since before we have been, and we only found them just recently. So is it really so crazy to think that there could be squids or octopi bigger than what we know about? Is it so crazy that in the vast expanse of this ocean that there is a creature larger than our ships, that maybe before all of our steam engines, maybe before the vast amount of ocean disturbing travel that we've done across the waters, that these things were closer to the surface and initially started lashing out at humans for going across the water? I don't think it's that crazy. And maybe there's not one around now. Maybe the Kraken, as it's known, doesn't exist today, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that it existed at one point. It's my favorite cryptid. It's the coolest one, objectively. That is the objective truth. My cats are fighting. About 70% of the Earth is covered in ocean, and we've explored around 5%, maybe even less. Who knows? Consider this, as a species, we didn't discover the Tyrannosaurus Rex until 1892, and we didn't find the first fossil until 1902. Obviously, that's more than a couple of hundred years since the T-Rex has been around. Squids have no bones. The Kraken, should it exist, would have no bones. It would leave no fossils. So it's possible it exists now in the vast ocean that we've never explored, that we can't even imagine what it is because we've never been there. It's also possible that maybe it went extinct. Competition got too fierce as sea life went deeper under the surface with the advent of boats and seafaring, and it just wasn't competitive enough with its massive size. Who knows? Maybe it's alive and well. I like to think that maybe there is a Kraken, and it makes me smile and it makes me laugh, and I hope it makes you smile too. Now, I know I started this video by telling you that I'm going to make you believe the Kraken is true. I don't fully believe the Kraken is real. I do suggest that you don't take what I said at face value and that you read Richard Ellis's book. Maybe you read Wendy Williams' book too and just take it with a grain of salt, everything she says. And who knows, maybe deep in the ocean, in the coldest recesses where we're hundreds of years from being able to reach due to the massive amount of pressure, maybe there is a Kraken writhing around, eating every fish it could find. I kind of like that idea. Anyway, thanks. Squids are not a part of our world, not elements of our consciousness. They live out of sight, underwater, at depths we cannot plumb, in numbers we cannot imagine. Their strength, their competence, and their predominance in their oceanic habitat have inspired some authors to classify them as an alternative form of intelligence on the planet. Their unfamiliar shape, with a cluster of arms at one end, eyes in the middle, and a tail at the other end, has only added to the impression that they are alien creatures from an unknown world, which is exactly what they are. Obviously, it's been a minute since I've posted a video. It's been a long time, probably 4 months, 4.5. Time just kind of got away from me. As you can see, background's a little different, got a new desk and stuff. The kids are growing up. It's harder to find time to record. I've never made a single cent from YouTube. Like I have like $30 sitting in my AdSense account. You know, contrary to what many Shane Dawson fans want to believe, I don't make money on YouTube, at least not right now. I'm not going to stop posting. I do plan to post a little more frequently, but the content's going to be different. It's not going to be commentary stuff. It's going to be like the Milgram video that I did. It's going to be like this video, kind of a deeper dive into a bigger subject, or maybe a smaller subject. I do have a series planned about epidemics. I think that'll be pretty fun, and I hope you guys will stick around for the ride. I have a lot of hopes for the next few videos, and you know, who knows, maybe views start picking up and I can justify putting a little more time into it. You know, I'm always going to put, you know, my family and the kids first. So I do appreciate you guys hanging out. If you have any comments, leave them below. Hit the like button if you would. If you like what you see, subscribe. If what I told you I'm coming up with next is interesting, then yeah, go ahead and hit that button. Thanks a lot.